All right, ready, set, go. It's Economics 202, summer of 2020. It is 12:22 in the afternoon on the 12th of July. Here I am, once again, trying to make sense of what's going on in the world and impart to you some much needed education on decisions. The study of economics, which is the study of decision making given scarce resources. We're on chapter 9. In the homework, I've got open up to chapter 14, which will be next week, but I'm catching up on my lecturing. I'm sorry for that. I've had connection troubles, and I did a whole 2-hour lecture. I've got to really keep my eye on my timer. I did a 2-hour lecture and everything froze, and I don't know what the heck went on, but I changed a few settings in this OBS software, and hopefully everything is going well. I don't want to, without further ado, here we go. Hey, I have a YouTube channel. Here it is, and if you're looking for my lectures or previous lectures or anything, they are all in here. If this is our house that we're selling, it was Christmas. I'm sitting over here upstairs in the loft. If you look off to my that way, there's a that's where the skylight is, and then there's a loft over here. But yeah, you can look this up. It's listed. The house is listed for sale. It was funny this morning. I digress, but I was looking at price changes since 2008 in real estate, and Colorado had from the peak in 2007, 2008, prices have risen over 65%. Now, we paid $930,000 for this house, and when it came time with the real estate agent to price it, my wife, of course, Kelly, was deeply involved, and as I always say, it's her house. I think that's a good policy. It is her house. She operates it. She manages it. I do a lot of painting and handiwork, but she manages the household and manages the books and manages our other real estate holdings. And that's a job, and it's a big job. Besides raising children and such. Anyhow, it gives me time to do what I do, which is a scholar of sorts, laugh if you will, and also I get to try and make money to manage. I get to try and create the capital we need to keep this thing going. And she also does the Airbnb, where she is out right now, changing that. We have a guest house that has to be cleaned every 2 or 3 days, and no one else can clean it but her. Maybe you know someone like this. I call it perfectionism. No, she's an innkeeper, and she loves the place perfect, and it is perfect. But ask anybody. I mean, you can look up that on Airbnb. You can see our little cottage. But she extracted. I put on the taxes $27,000 in profit last year that she extracted from that little, basically 2-bedroom Airbnb. So nothing to snort at, but it has. Cleaning it is the big thing, and it's not easy when you're, and she allows pets, which I wouldn't. Anyhow, there we stopped at chapter 8. Let's go to chapter 9. But first, we're going to go to the Wall Street Journal, and let's go to my history here. But we're going to go to the Wall Street Journal, and again, I'm going to give you a short tutorial. I don't have Becky Kramer come in, but Becky is the librarian at the Quigley Library, and Becky and I often will, especially if you're writing a paper, we'll do a whole hour or so on how to do research. But I want to head you in the right direction and show you what it is that I do when I get interested in a subject and I begin to research it. So as an example, I read this article this week, and yeah, of course, this caught my eye, being that I'm, I'm I had great dismay and disdain for the outcome of or the discussion taking place during, even by our college president and many other college presidents during this entire Black Lives Matter resurgence and rioting in the streets and other all of what took place. And we discussed it, obviously, and when we talked about police and policing, well, I get really interested and I start looking for things on YouTube, and I start looking for scholars who I can listen to and listen to their lectures. And Glenn Loury, this gentleman here, is one who emerged right away as someone I not only did I agree with him, but not on everything, but he spoke in a way that immediately garnered my respect, because he spoke about, you know, the dialogue that we should be having and not the monologue. So Glenn is from a college called Brown. If you're not familiar with Brown, it's one of the Ivy League colleges, winding journey from the south side of Chicago. That's where he was born, the south side of Chicago. If you're not familiar, that's not a great part of town. That's where a lot of the black on black violence is going on right now. People are dying every day there. Keep that in mind. So anyway, next spring, Glenn Loury will teach a new course on freedom of expression to students at Brown, where he's a professor of economics. Okay, now you really have my attention, because I listened to Glenn, before, and I thought, oh, what an interesting guy. Well, he's an economics professor. We have something in common. He's gonna do a course on freedom of expression, and he's gonna read Plato, Socrates, Milton, behind me. John Stuart Mill, well, need I say more? George Orwell and Alan Bloom. Excuse me. He said, stressing that Bloom's best known work, The Closing of the American Mind, How Higher Education Has Failed Democracy and Impoverished the Souls of Today's Students, is as relevant as it was when it was published in 1987. Now, I have not read that book, so now I have a book to read. Damn it. I have a lot of books to read. But also, Mr. Loury caught my eye because he's thinking about adding the Paxson letter to his syllabus so his students might critique it. That June 1st missive is a letter to the Brown community from Christine Paxson, Brown's president, asserted that oppression, as well as prejudice, outright bigotry, and hate directly and personally affect the lives of millions of people in this nation every minute and every hour. Our president here, Dr. Hauser, made a similar statement, not the same. I don't want to paraphrase her here because I'll blow it, but you can look it up on the colorado.edu, coloradomountain.edu site and read that one. There's a paragraph about that size that I find unnerving, to say the least. I don't agree. She and I disagree. I would never sign that letter. And for the same reasons I'm going to outline that Mr. Loury finds trouble with Ms. Paxson's letter. And it's Dr. Loury, by the way. Company policy and Black Lives Matter view of the world reflected from the Brown University College President's Office. On June 5th, he published a rebuttal in City Journal. I made somewhat of a rebuttal on YouTube in your lecture, the last, I don't know whether it was last lecture or the one before. Ms. Paxson's letter was signed by everybody, from deans to general counsel. Everybody's on board. Well, I'm not. that made it official policy, and here's why I'm not. I don't think universities or colleges should have official policies about contentious political issues. Whether or not I agree or disagree is immaterial. That goes against the telos of what our college is. Our college is a place for open inquiry, not orthodoxy, heterodoxy. If they do, we foreclose debate over, this is Loury again, if we foreclose debate over contentious issues by declaring that there's only one way for a decent person at this university to think about them, how can we fulfill our mission of teaching our students to think critically? You can't, in my opinion. You cannot. I'm here to try. The teaching of economics is teaching you to think critically. That's what's going on, because there is no agreement in economics. It's not like mathematics where we can say, okay, this is, or physics where we've got certain laws, but economics. Now I will say, no one has discounted or come with any kind of critique of the law of supply and demand that has any is valid at all. So the law of supply and demand, you may say, okay, that works, and until you could, find some way to invalidate it. We do have that in economics. So anyhow, this is a great article to read. Maybe I'll put it up for you. But what I really wanted to get across to you today is how I met John Loury, or Glenn Loury, and how important he is to my thinking about this issue now. So I along the lines of Tom Sowell, who wrote Disparities and Discrimination, he wrote in a book what Mr. Loury has been studying, and so I immediately looked. It says, "Oh, Lowry's at Brown. He's an economist. He must have a curriculum vitae." A curriculum vitae is the academic equivalent of a resume. So here is his. I just Googled it, and it turned up at Brown. Glenn Cartman Loury. That's funny. If you're a South Park fan. Department of Economics, Brown University. You can get a hold of him. You can write him a note, and I'm just going to go out on a limb, but I think he's the type of man who will respond to you if you write to him. Anyway, this is where he got his BA in mathematics at Northwestern in 1972. So he's approximately 10 years older than I am. I think he's 71 years old, but I know because I looked into his life that he took several years off and had a child early, etc. So he's 71, I believe. PhD in economics, MIT. What do I need to tell you about the Massachusetts Institute of Technology? It's one of the best schools in the country. They don't give out PhDs like little liver pills. That's an old statement. They just don't give them out all the time with Wheaties box tops. There's another one. You have to earn first you have to get in, and that's a giant IQ test getting in. So he got in and he earned a PhD, and his thesis is listed here. Essays in the Theory of Distribution of Income. Immediately he went to a contentious issue for his thesis. So you could see that he's going to poke that bear. He wants to talk about things that maybe other people don't want to talk about. So I haven't read the thesis. I will when I get time. But I've listened to much of what he said, especially his Bloggerhead videos with John McWhorter. This one here, The Glenn Show. John McWhorter is a linguist over at, I think I put up one of their videos for you. These are two smart guys sitting around talking about racism and things that cringy subjects. So anyway, from here in this curriculum vitae, look at these are all the papers that Mr. Loury has written. Now, you can say to yourself, well, I think he's a right-wing nut. Well, you'd be wrong. I mean, just straight up wrong. Or you could say he doesn't know what he's talking about. And you'd be wrong again, because he does. He's done a lot of work in this area. This is 2020, he wrote Relations Before Transactions, 40 Years of Thinking and Persisting Racial Inequality in the United States. He does a talk of that nature, and when he presented this paper, he did a talk about it. I listened to the talk. I mean, I couldn't resist. He has a great way of speaking. I would, I listen to people so that I can learn how to speak myself, and he's got a great way of speaking and a great cadence. I think if he wasn't so honest, he'd make a great politician. Sorry. To be or not to be, stereotypes, right? Identity, choice, and group inequality. Whoa, right? This is an economist. Then we're down here, crime, inequality, and social justice, colorblind and affirmative actions, relations before transactions. Here's the earlier one. So, and you can click on these and open them and read them. They're coming from Brown. This one immediately came down, and economic analysis. It's right in Acrobat. It's open source. He's not charging you, right? And you can read his writing and then make a decision. This is what I'm trying to get at. You don't dismiss someone because they were pilloried in your favorite crappy version of the news that gets pushed into your phone, okay? This is not how we do critical thinking. And you are at an academic level now where just simply saying, regurgitating ideologically charged statements from the news in papers is not going to cut it anymore. Your research has to be well done and well cited, right? And not just people writing papers to one another, citing each other. And I'll give you an example of this. The environmentalist community is famous for this. I'm picking on them for a reason, because their research sucks. It's terrible. That's one of the reasons that I'm not very impressed with the movement. That's empirical. It's not something I made up because everybody's a damn environmentalist. Everybody loves the earth, so quit it. It's not that if you saw this week, I'll talk about this a little bit, but let's go back to the opinion page, and then we'll get started with chapter 9. A guy by the name of Schellenberger, I should Schellen, wrote a book. Schellenberg wrote a book about Michael Schellenberger apologizes on behalf of environmentalists, but he wrote a book recently. There he is. Let's see which books he wrote. Oh, that's not him. Oh, go back. Come on. I'm sorry. I hate not being prepared, but sometimes you just have to go with it. It's Schellenberg. That's why. Walter. Oh, gosh. Look at that. Is that an SS guy? Yeah, yikes. And here's his books. Apocalypse Never. That's the new one. It's in audio. Apocalypse Never. And he's very well spoken. You can look him up. He's not. I mean, he is not on the right by any stretch of the imagination. This is the first time I've heard of him. He wrote "Why Environmental Alarmist Hurts Us All." He's talking about people who have made this into a religion. So worth looking at. I've only read a number of critiques of the book. So back to the op-ed pages. This is what I was talking about when I put on Michael Crichton. Oops, is this going? I hope that this is going. This is going. Hopefully I haven't frozen. And I should keep clicking out of stuff so that I don't freeze. The ideological corruption of science. Do you know what they're talking about here? I hope so. When ideologues get a hold of science, it's never a good idea. And this is written by Lawrence Krauss, who's a scientist. In 1980s, when I was a young professor of physics and astronomy at Yale, another very good institution, deconstructionism was in vogue in the English department. We in the science departments would scoff at the lack of objective intellectual standards. Deconstructionism, if you want to read about it philosophically, it's Derrida, Foucault, the French philosophers who said, well, I'm paraphrasing or boiling it down to a quick soundbite, but if you write something, it has infinite interpretations, and the objective sort of retaliation to that argument or rebuke of that argument is no. There's a hierarchy of values in ideas, right? There's good ideas and bad ideas, right? You may think that there's an infinite number of ways to interpret everything, but there's not an infinite number of good ideas within the Bible may be a better book than a comic book, things like that. So lack of objective intellectual standards in humanity is epitomized by a movement that argued against the existence of objective truth itself. Objective, you understand objective and subjective? Objective, I'm 5'9". Subjective, I'm attractive, right? And if you don't believe in discrimination, I hope my wife discriminated when she started dating me. I think she was discriminating against someone else. That's the way it is. Objective truth, arguing that all such claims to knowledge were tainted by ideological biases due to race, sex, or economic dominance. It could never happen in hard sciences except under a dictatorship such as the Nazi condemnation of Jewish science, right? Very famously, a whole bunch of Jewish or German scientists got together and denounced the theory of relativity, which was Einstein, because Einstein was Jewish. And Einstein famously said, well, it only takes one of you to prove me wrong. They had a consensus of German scientists that thought Einstein was an asshole. Go figure. So be careful. Jewish science, or the Stalinist campaign against genetics led by Trofim Lysenko, in which literally thousands of mainstream geneticists were dismissed in the effort to suppress any opposition to the prevailing political view of the state. This was called Lysenkoism. Oh my God, it killed, I don't know. Lysenkoism was horrible. They made such errors in planting and harvesting crops that It killed a ton of people. And this one also talks about racism and some other things, censorship, and that. So there were two movements that were mainstream pieces of science, like Lysenkoism. Eugenics was the same way. It was accepted by a consensus of scientists. And what I'm saying is, when you look at the climate debate, you can't look at the papers that all come out of the same place. They're all being written to each other. There's no rigor to the peer review system, in that all of the money is from the government. So you almost just say, well, ExxonMobil's got less bias than what's going on in the universities. It's that bad, and you may laugh and scoff at that, but do the work. Start looking at both sides of the argument. If you don't know the other side of the argument, go figure it out. And the same thing goes for, of course, Mr. Loury. And you can ignore Mr. Loury at your. You don't want to go head to head with him. I don't want to go head to head with him in a debate. I'm glad we agree on almost everything. I heard something the other day. He said that I didn't agree with, but I don't know if I'm willing to go after him. Because he's one of those intellects that, and John McWhorter, by the way, who happily called out Jordan Peterson at the Aspen Ideas Fest. And I wasn't in the room, but I saw the tape. And, John is that confident. And Jordan's a smart guy. And he got him. He got him with his questions. So look up Aspen Ideas Fest if you're interested in that discussion. It was about pronouns and the controversy Peterson got in over mandatory speech in Canada. That was an interesting topic. Okay, on we go. I'm going to shut up about this stuff. When you want to get interested in something, study it, and study it more than just topically. Okay, you can see where I go with things. I dig deep in this stuff. Okay, I try to get all kinds of different ideas going. Because the mainstream media is just brutal. A moment about. I'm gonna make this into one tape, and then I'll make the next one, because I'm gonna check and make sure that my recording's working. Ooh, did it just stop? I hope not. Okay. Anyway, I had something to say about this assignment. I read a number of your responses there. As usual, I just love reading your responses. So please don't take my comments the wrong way. And I love everything about it. I just love doing this. So it's the scalpel of truth, if you will, with the anesthetic of love. I love everything you write. I'm just trying to help you become that good writer and good thinker, as I'm still trying to become. Okay, does the type of tyranny described in our founding documents exist today? Let's remember, when a professor, now I'm easy, so you're all going to get good grades. I am easy. I'm a libertarian. I see the serious problems in education now. I'm disgusted by them. A lot of them. Some of them I just went over. But my advice to you is, when you see this, does the type of tyranny described in our founding documents exist today? Should Americans be concerned about their freedom? These are two separate questions. So in answering the first one, what I would have suggested, you read both documents, and then you come back and you go, okay, just what are they talking about in terms of tyranny as described in the Declaration? Because it's very specific. The Declaration is very specific. Now, the call to arms here, this is called Declaration by the Representatives, setting forth the causes and necessity of taking up arms. Just as an aside, for some months, people in the colonies have been gathering arms and powder and been training to fight the British, if necessary, at a moment's notice. This is where, if you look at if you're a football fan, it's the New England Patriots, right? And on their helmets, there used to be a Minuteman. It was what was called a Minuteman. And sorry, ladies, I'm sure there were plenty of armed women around in those days. But they called the part of the Second Amendment was the idea that we have an organized militia, and and I was thinking about this morning, and this might be weird to you, but this is how I think sometimes. What if there were Minutemen and women in that area of Minnesota when George Floyd was under the foot of this cop? What if those people were all armed? What if they came out of their houses and said, "Hey, wait a minute, we don't, we've all got weapons too." Now, that's a tyranny to make a law that prevents their ownership of arms. In my way of thinking, may have contributed to that man's death and his criminality, because he was a criminal. But the fact that he died the way he did was wrong. We all agree on that. It was a terrible day for a lot of reasons. But what if when that woman said, "Hey, listen, get your foot off his neck. I'm an EMT and I've got my musket or my gun, or I got my quit it. Get your foot off his neck." What if everybody in that crowd was, I had this discussion with my sister the other day. It didn't go that well, but my sister Judy is pretty far to the right in her thinking, but she was also a teacher at Sandy Hook. When that went down, she was in the middle school, but she was there that day when Adam Lanza walked in there and killed 26 kids with a semi-automatic weapon. So she's very sensitive to this subject of armament and guns. And I was talking to her about, well, don't you think that maybe we should arm some of the, if we were armed over at CMC, there's no damn way that school shooter's going to get far, if I've got a handgun in my briefcase. But nonetheless, that's a difficult question. And I make these connections just to maybe poke that bear a little bit. But as far as tyranny goes, I read a lot of your responses already. But what I did was I went to here, and in the Declaration of Independence, Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, usurping our authority as colonies, because we had a colonial set of laws, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over the states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused to assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for public good. We made laws in our state or town or in this case the colonies, and the crown ignored them. Have you ever seen this happen lately? Right? We make a law. You make a law in a municipal law, and the federal government says, no, you can't do that. You can't run your own schools because we have No Child Left Behind. If you don't know anything about No Child Left Behind, look it up. The idea that the federal government has jurisdiction over a local matter, that's crazy. We're just talking about firemen and policemen. Well, the reason there's so many policemen is because there's federal guidelines, there's federal regulation mandates that have money attached to them. And they'll say, well, they're not mandates, but there's money attached. So what is it, the carrot or the stick? Right? This is part of this. He